The overhead lights buzzed softly in the subterranean command center below Tokyo's Imperial Military Headquarters. The clock reads 8:30 in the morning, August 6, 1945, and the thick summer heat carries the burden of a nation engaged in conflict for almost 4 years. Military personnel in damp olive green uniforms hover over communication stations, marking positions on enormous wall charts displaying the contracting borders of the Japanese territories. General Kurochika Anami, serving as Japan's Minister of War, walks through the passages with the posture of a lifelong military man, unfamiliar with loss. At age 58, his lined face reflects the assurance of someone who holds unwavering faith in Japan's sacred purpose. The morning assessment was expected to be standard procedure. Reports received during the night from military commanders throughout the mainland territories. Information regarding the extensive Ketsugo defensive strategy intended to make any Allied landing operation so devastating that the adversary would seek negotiations. However, something appears amiss. The communication panel for the Chugoku Regional Command displays a blank slate. No dawn dispatches from Hiroshima's 2nd General Army Command Center. No status updates from the 400,000 military and civilian inhabitants of Japan's 8th largest metropolitan area. The radio technicians adjust their frequency controls, detecting only interference where the customary buzz of operational updates should exist. Commander, a junior signals officer stutters, perspiration forming on his brow despite the subterranean temperature. We've completely lost communication with Hiroshima. All armed forces channels, all public broadcasting, everything ceased transmission at roughly 8:15 this morning. Anami's penetrating eyes focus intently. Throughout 4 years of comprehensive warfare, entire metropolitan centers don't merely disappear from the transmission network. Not cities housing significant military command posts. Not cities that mere hours earlier were transmitting routine defense preparations. What power on this planet could immediately silence 340,000 individuals? You must comprehend the psychology of these 6 individuals who determined Japan's destiny during August 5, 1945. They referred to themselves as the Supreme War Council, the Big Six, and they sincerely held the conviction that they possessed the means to triumph, even as Allied strategic bombers reduced their metropolitan areas to cinders repeatedly. General Anami, Admiral Soimu Toyoda, General Yoshijiro Umezu, Prime Minister Admiral Kantaro Suzuki, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, and Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai. 6 individuals, 70 million lives balanced precariously. But here's what rendered them so perilously self-assured. They possessed classified knowledge the Allied forces couldn't conceivably grasp. From 1940 onward, Japan had been working urgently to construct its own nuclear weapon. 2 distinct initiatives: the Army's NIGO operation, headed by Dr. Yoshio Nishina, and the Navy's FGO research under Dr. Bunsaku Arakatsu. These weren't unsophisticated attempts. Nishina was stood among the globe's premier nuclear scientists, someone who had collaborated with Niels Bohr in Copenhagen, who understood the theoretical principles of nuclear fission superior to nearly anyone living. And that expertise had revealed something critical. Constructing nuclear weapons was essentially infeasible. The isotope separation process alone demanded industrial infrastructure beyond comprehension. Enormous electromagnetic processing facilities, countless tons of raw uranium material, energy requirements that would deplete entire geographic areas. Japan's foremost scientists had determined that even the formidable United States, possessing its intact industrial infrastructure, could manufacture possibly 1 or 2 nuclear devices maximum, perhaps 3, assuming they had commenced earlier than anyone imagined. Therefore, when the dawn dispatches started arriving, fragmentary, conflicting, scarcely credible, the military command dismissed them with the certainty of individuals who held advanced understanding. A limited number of B-29 aircraft struck Hiroshima using a novel weapon type, stated the initial organized dispatch from a survey aircraft. Substantial destruction noted. Admiral Toyota, commander of the Naval General Staff, barely looked up from his operational charts. Substantial destruction from several bombers? He had snickered. He had endured the enormous B-29 operations that had previously devastated 42 principal Japanese metropolitan areas. Most likely a focused firebombing operation. The Allies are becoming more effective. Yet, as hours elapsed, the dispatches became more peculiar. Railway operations to Hiroshima had been canceled without timeline. Armed forces communications stayed entirely disconnected. Most disturbing of all, a meteorological survey plane transmitted seeing something unprecedented. A fungus-shaped formation ascending nearly 40,000 feet skyward. Subsequently arrived President Truman's broadcast announcement, relayed by international radio and intercepted by Japanese receivers. 16 hours previously, an American aircraft released a single bomb on Hiroshima, a vital Japanese military installation. That weapon possessed greater force than 20,000 tons of conventional explosives. It is a nuclear bomb. The quiet in the Supreme War Council chamber was profound. General Anami eventually responded, his tone bearing the practiced composure of a professional military commander. "The Allied forces are conducting mental warfare," General Anami responded. "Even assuming they have created some variety of nuclear mechanism, the engineering demands render large-scale manufacturing infeasible. Our own investigations validate this." Toyota acknowledged soberly, "If the Allied forces controlled an inventory of such devices, they would have deployed them months ago. This is evidently a final desperate maneuver, possibly their only such mechanism." What they remained unaware of was that their technical knowledge had transformed to their greatest vulnerability. Their nuclear investigations had instructed them exactly how hard the objective was. Yet it had simultaneously prevented them from recognizing Allied industrial capabilities they couldn't imagine. The Manhattan Project had utilized 130,000 personnel throughout numerous states, consumed more electrical power than whole countries, and constituted the most extensive classified industrial endeavor in human existence. The Japanese military command was formulating decisions based on what they knew was achievable, but they were confronting an adversary that had transformed the achievable itself. As August 6th transitioned to August 7th, as the first terrible news started reaching from investigation units racing towards Hiroshima's devastation, these 6 individuals maintained their conviction with the franticness of drowning individuals clutching wreckage. They remained oblivious that their complete knowledge was about to transform permanently. What happened next would demolish not merely their military strategy, but their essential understanding of armed conflict. Dr. Yoshio Nishina had examined the theoretical calculations. He understood better than virtually anyone living what a nuclear bomb could accomplish theoretically. Yet theory and reality are divided by an abyss that can solely be traversed through immediate experience. And on August 7, 1945, Nishina traversed that abyss. The railway journey from Tokyo to the devastation of Hiroshima consumed 11 hours through terrain that seemed progressively bizarre. For kilometers before arriving at the metropolitan area, Nishina could see vegetation stripped of foliage, utility poles fractured like thin sticks, and an unusual bitter odor that irritated his respiratory passages. Then the railway stopped. The rails forward had been contorted into unnatural formations by powers that challenged understanding. Nishina traversed the remaining 5 kilometers into what had been Hiroshima. Nothing whatsoever had equipped him for what he discovered. Buildings hadn't merely crumbled, they had been eliminated entirely. Human silhouettes were seared permanently on masonry surfaces. The spectral impressions of individuals who had been traveling to employment when 8:15 a.m. transformed into the final instant they would ever witness. The explosion center, where the device had detonated 1,100 feet overhead, was a flawless radius of complete annihilation, extending for kilometers in all trajectories. Most disturbing of all were those who remained. Nishina, an individual who had committed his existence to the advancement of scientific understanding, found himself confronting radiation poisoning, a phenomenon that existed solely in academic physics publications until that instant. Casualties whose flesh was physically separating from their frames, individuals expelling blood, hair detaching in masses, the living deceased navigating through devastation that resembled the terrain of an extraterrestrial world. Nishina's hands shook as he recorded measurements with his radiation detector, the mechanism growing frenzied as he neared ground zero. This wasn't merely an explosive mechanism. This was the essential powers of existence released upon a civilian metropolitan area. Everything he believed he knew about the boundaries of nuclear devices had been completely, disastrously incorrect. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, the Supreme War Council was about to obtain information that would render Hiroshima appear like a simple introduction. At 11:02 in the morning on August 9th, as the Big Six were ultimately convening to examine the Hiroshima dispatches, an assistant rushed into the meeting chamber with information that removed the color from every countenance present. Nagasaki has been struck with another nuclear bomb. The chamber fell silent except for the noise of Admiral Toyoda's writing instrument dropping to the polished table. Another weapon, merely 3 days afterward. In that instant, every assumption the Japanese military command had grasped disintegrated like parchment in combustion. If the Allied forces possessed 2 nuclear bombs, they could possess 3, or 10, or 100. The entire basis of Japan's defensive strategy, inflict such severe losses during the landing operation that they would negotiate, had just transformed into irrelevant. Why would they invade when they could merely eliminate Japanese metropolitan areas from existence individually until nothing remained except radioactive wasteland? Yet even confronted with this apocalyptic actuality, General Anami couldn't relinquish his conception of dignified death over dishonored continuation. Would it not be magnificent, he inquired, his tone bearing an unsettling beauty, for this entire nation to be eliminated like an exquisite blossom? The other council participants observed him in astonished silence. Here existed an individual so devoted to the warrior's philosophy that he would choose national elimination over national capitulation. In his perspective, there was something pure, something aesthetically perfect about Japan vanishing in nuclear combustion rather than submitting before foreign invaders. But reality was about to intrude in the most crushing way conceivable. On August 10th, the Japanese military captured an Allied fighter aviator named Marcus McDilda, shot down 2 days following Hiroshima. During interrogation, which involved physical coercion, McDilda furnished information that would ultimately demolish the Japanese military's resistance. The difficulty was, McDilda knew essentially nothing about nuclear weapons. He was a standard fighter aviator who had never been briefed on atomic devices. Yet, confronted with physical coercion and frantic to survive, he told his captors what he calculated they desired to receive, embroidering every detail he could conceive. The Allied forces, McDilda asserted, possessed over 100 nuclear weapons. They could release 3 days. Tokyo would be subsequent, followed by Kyoto, then Osaka. Every major Japanese metropolitan area would be annihilated within weeks. None of this was true. In actuality, the United States possessed precisely 0 nuclear weapons remaining. The next device wouldn't be ready until late August, and production was agonizingly slow. Yet McDilda's frantic fabrications contained enough technical-sounding details to be credible to interrogators who were searching for any information about this incomprehensible new device. When McDilda's invented intelligence reached the Supreme War Council, it landed like a final devastating impact. War Minister Anami, the individual who had spoken so beautifully about national obliteration, stood before his colleagues with the weight of complete defeat in his tone. 1 nuclear bomb, he recited from the interrogation document, could destroy 6 square miles, comparable to 2,000 B-29s, each equipped with 300 standard bombs. The Allied forces seemed to possess 100 nuclear weapons. They could release 3 days. The next target might very well be Tokyo. The chamber was silent, except for the noise of Admiral Suzuki's strained breathing. These individuals had directed millions of military personnel, had coordinated operations throughout the Pacific, had never faced defeat. Yet they were confronting a device that rendered their military expertise as antiquated as traditional swords in the era of automatic weaponry. Yet remarkably, they remained split. 3 votes for capitulation, 3 to vote for continuing fighting even against nuclear annihilation. It would take an intervention unprecedented in Japanese historical record to resolve the deadlock. Just before midnight on August 9, 1945, something that hadn't transpired in over 1,000 years of Japanese historical record occurred. Emperor Hirohito, the divine figure who customarily remained removed from worldly determinations, entered a meeting chamber and personally resolved a governmental deadlock. The scenario was unprecedented and extraordinary. The 6 participants of the Supreme War Council, together with Baron Kichiro Hiranuma, positioned themselves in ceremonial arrangements around a glossy table. The emperor, diminutive in physical stature, but bearing the weight of sacred authority, articulated words that would terminate not merely a conflict, but an entire method of thinking about armed conflict. I have given profound consideration to the circumstances domestically and internationally, Hirohito stated, his tone scarcely audible. We must endure the unendurable and tolerate what is intolerable. In that instant, Japan's military command faced the paramount choice between dignity and continuation. Some, like Prime Minister Suzuki, embraced the new reality. Others, like General Anami, chose a different course. On August 15th, hours preceding the emperor's capitulation transmission, Anami executed ceremonial seppuku in his residence. He died as he lived, according to the warrior's philosophy that nuclear weapons had rendered antiquated. His final poem, inscribed in his own blood, expressed loyalty to the emperor and sorrow that he could not continue serving. He never knew that the world had essentially changed. But perhaps the most heartbreaking figure was Admiral Toyoda, who had so confidently proclaimed that Allied forces couldn't have many nuclear weapons. After the war, when the full magnitude of the Manhattan Project was revealed, when he learned that Allied industrial capability had achieved what Japanese scientists regarded impossible, Toyota allegedly spent hours watching photographs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in utter silence. The nuclear bombings didn't merely end World War II, they significated the end of an entire military doctrine based on honor, dedication, and traditional warfare. Modern military strategists study this story not just as history, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mental blindness in command, how knowledge can become imprisonment, how specialized expertise can blind commanders from recognizing revolutionary changes. Today, as we face our own technological revolutions, artificial intelligence, digital warfare, space-based weaponry, the story of Japan's military command in August 1945 remains painfully relevant. It reminds us that the most catastrophic military failures often originate not from external enemies, but from internal incapacity to adapt to new realities. The Japanese forces couldn't accept America's nuclear bomb devastation capability because they had convinced themselves it was impossible. Their technical knowledge, their specialized expertise, their societal confidence all turned into instruments used against them. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the certainty that you understand the rules of engagement, even when someone else has already changed them forever. What insights are you taking from this story? Share your thoughts about leadership, innovation, and the courage to question our own beliefs.